Today we're going to be doing a Getting Past Imposter Syndrome workshop, which is brought to you by Wink. Today we're going to be going over imposter syndrome, some tips on getting past imposter syndrome, as well as a panel at the end. So first, imposter syndrome. What is imposter syndrome? Imposter syndrome can be defined as a collection of feelings of inadequacy that persists despite evident success. Imposters suffer from chronic self-doubt and a sense of intellectual fraudulence that override any feelings of success or external proof of their competence. So, who experiences imposter syndrome? 75% of women surveyed in a recent KPMG study are experiencing imposter syndrome. It also affects 2 out of 5 successful people, as well as it is more relevant in those who are minority in a group. So here are some tips to get over imposter syndrome. Be sure to break the silence and know when you're experiencing imposter syndrome. Separate feelings from fact. Even though you might be feeling that you are an imposter, it might not be true because you might be doing a lot of work that contributes to the fact that you are doing better than you might think you are. Also recognize when you should feel fraudulent, know at what point you should be feeling as though you're an imposter, even though it's very rare that you should feel that way. Also accentuate the positive. Realize that you're doing a lot of positive things and that you shouldn't be experiencing imposter syndrome since you've contributed a lot to not being an imposter. Also, develop a healthy response to failure and mistake making. Be sure to know when you make a mistake and then also not get too down on yourself when you make one. Write the rules. Also, develop a new script. Visualize success and know how to achieve your goals. Reward yourself whenever you do something right, and fake it till you make it. So next we're going to be doing our panel. So on our panel is Lauren Flemmer, Kayla Braden, Ruth Lang, and myself. So next we're going to be going over some questions, and the panelists will be answering those questions, as well as we'll be going over questions in the end if you would like to answer, if you would like us to answer any of your questions. So here are our questions. So the first question is, have you personally experienced imposter syndrome and how did you address it? So,
do you want to go first?
Yeah. Whoever wants to go first.
Okay. I think almost everyone experiences imposter syndrome. And I think that Christina is definitely right in the sense that minorities experience it a lot more just because you feel like the most out of place when you're not within the majority. So sometimes like the things that a majority might say or do is not quite what you would do. And I think that's especially prevalent in like the tech field as a woman in STEM. And I guess in terms of addressing it, I think the biggest thing I do with imposter syndrome for me personally is I always compare myself to other people. So I think especially as a student, when you're not in the workforce yet, you feel kind of unstable and you're like, oh, everyone's doing this. And what if I don't do this? And what if I don't get a job? But I think the biggest takeaways I've learned is one, not everybody knows what they're doing, even if it seems like they are. And then two, if you compare yourself to others, it's not really a fair comparison because you don't know what that person has gone through in their life and what they want to do versus and it's also not fair to you because you don't know your comparison with them is like not the same as their lived experiences. And I also always have found that a measure of comparison is me versus like my past self, like kind of motivating myself to grow past like the person I was yesterday, the person I was 2 weeks ago, or like what did I want to do 2 weeks ago or like a month ago, and how has that changed? But that's how I personally tried to address it.
Yeah, and just to kind of like add on to that, I think another way that I experience imposter syndrome is just kind of whenever I do something nice or not nice, but like when I achieve something or, when I reach a goal, sometimes I don't even, I kind of just like, not excuse it, but I kind of just think it's luck. Like, oh, I just got lucky, or I just kind of like, it really wasn't, because of my hard work. It was just because the circumstances were right. And that's why I was just, somehow able to make it this far. But I usually just try and kind of notice when I'm doing that, and then try and convince myself that, it was, for like due to for a large part of it was just me, my hard work, just getting to where I am and stuff. I try not to think about luck too much, even though it might have something to do with it. I feel like it's good to kind of look back on what you've done, like up to this point, and just kind of appreciate what you've done up to this point, and not just say that it's because this happened, or if I wasn't here at this time, it wouldn't have happened. It's yeah, I feel like I just try not to blame it too much on luck, because I feel like that's also, even though it's not typically what people think of when you think about imposter syndrome, like that sort of mindset, I feel like it's pretty common with imposter syndrome and people who have it and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, adding on to what Kayla said, I definitely agree with that. This is something I personally do a lot that I need to get better at, but I'll say things like, oh, I was probably the only person who applied, or oh, I barely even studied, I probably just got lucky with that test, or things like that. So I think kind of addressing that, it's really good to acknowledge that, keep track of the good things you do and acknowledge that you worked hard for those things, and just don't sell yourself short. It's really easy to only focus on the bad and the negative. So I guess just keeping track of what you've done and what you've accomplished is really good in kind of combating the feelings of imposter syndrome.
Yeah, for me too. I also do the same thing. So for my past internships, I was like, oh, I must have been the resume that they accidentally chose or something, or mine just somehow caught their eye, or I thought that maybe I was only chosen because I was oh, a woman or person of color. But sometimes I need to look back and be okay, I had previous internship experience before that. I did well in my internships. I have good experience. I just didn't get chosen because of what I stated before, just because it was random or some sort of luck. It's because I actually deserve those positions. I worked really hard to get where I am right now, and that I deserve where I am. And how I try to address that is what I said before. I try to be okay, I deserve my accomplishments. I work really hard for them. Yeah. So our next question is, what do you believe contributes to women experiencing imposter syndrome so frequently? And then we can go in the same order that we want.
Yeah. I would say, I think I said this earlier, but just being part of the minority means that you kind of have a different outlook, and your experiences are going to be different. Therefore, you're not going to have as much people who relate to your experience within your field as the majority of the people in your field. And I think us as being part of just women in STEM and also women in leadership, we have talked about so many times about you walk into class, you count how many girls are there, and it just becomes a thing, right? But very clearly, a guy in STEM is not going to have to do that. So kind of that feeling already of feeling oh, the majority of my field doesn't have that kind of experience where they have to consider how many of these people are going to have the same experience as me in this class. And that's just in the classroom alone. So I feel like it just kind of stacks up and becomes a bigger thing. And yeah, obviously, sadly, with the STEM field, there are stereotypes, and there are things. I think something that women hear frequently is oh, you're going to get a job pretty easily because you're a girl or because you're a minority. So they need to show that they're diverse, which completely discredits all the hard work that that person has actually done. So that becomes a part of an issue. I think that becomes part of the imposter syndrome, where you start to believe that, and you're oh, am I just here because they just needed one more person who's not a man on the board? Or I think an issue that a lot of people bring up is that a lot of people of color on executive boards for companies are usually the diversity chair, or the person who's in charge of making sure that the company is hiring enough minorities, which in then becomes a problem of its own. Oh, did they just hire me because they needed someone to make sure that was on that needed this position, etc. So I would say that is one of the reasons. I personally feel that quite a lot too.
Yeah, I would say, like Ruth said, you walk into a class and there's only maybe 5 women in total. It's really easy to kind of see them as your competition. Just kind of subconsciously, I think we kind of try to compete with each other. So I think that's definitely a factor as to why women experience imposter syndrome a lot more. And I'd say to combat that, we just need to kind of see each other as all on the same team. We're all kind of fighting similar battles and going through similar things. So we need to kind of uplift each other and empower each other and try to help each other succeed.
I think just kind of in addition to what Ruth and Lauren have already said, I think just from personal experience, I feel like I have a hard time kind of relating to other people in like my major and stuff, just because I feel like I I just don't fit in, or we have like similar, not, we don't have that many similar interests and stuff. So on top of feeling like, on top of feeling imposter syndrome in terms of like the work that I do and how, how good I am in like my classes or how well I'm like succeeding and stuff. On top of that, it's also like, I feel like my personality doesn't really fit in. And so there's just kind of like an added pressure to kind of be interested in like the things that other people are interested in within like, CS or like, whatever kind of group that you're in. And it's hard to kind of like, be authentic, I guess. And so I feel like it's just kind of like an added pressure, just from someone who's like a woman in tech or woman in STEM, to not only kind of like compare yourself in terms of work, but also compare yourself in terms of like personality and like, do I fit in with these types of people? Like, do I like them? Do they like me? It's just kind of like an added pressure.
I think it might be because people always say that, oh, you only got here because you're a woman, kind of thing. I've actually, based on personal experience, I've actually had that told to me multiple times, where people are just like, oh, like you got it because you're a woman. You probably like went to like the top of the resume stack. They probably like said like, oh, she's a woman. We need like diversity, kind of thing. I was like, oh, I was like taken aback a little bit. I was like, did I actually just get here because I was a woman? Because like that kind of thing. And then, yeah, I feel like a lot of women probably experience that as well. Or like people are like they say it so casually that it's like, oh, should I think of this as like fact or kind of thing? They're like, yeah, like you should apply here because yeah, you're a woman of color. You'll like for sure be hired. And I'm just like, oh, is that like, do my actual like accomplishments not matter? Is it just because you know I am a woman of color, kind of thing? But I think we need to realize that like it's not just because of that. Like a lot of the people that I've met in my previous internships are like well qualified for where they are. So it's definitely not because of that. They're as qualified as people who are not women or are not people of color. So yeah. And then next question. So why do you think people experience imposter syndrome?
I think it just stems from that feeling of like there's always like a doubt in your head. I think it comes from like a lack of self-confidence, which I think is something that everybody has in some form or aspect of some way. And it's like one of those things where it's pretty hard because it's one of those things where like your growth out of imposter syndrome isn't going to be linear, like growth, for example, in like a sport or something. Like once you learn a certain set of skills, you can like keep growing. But imposter syndrome is going to be one of those things where like sometimes you're going to feel really great about yourself. You're going to feel like you're on top of the world. And other times you're going to be like, oh, I feel like I shouldn't be here. Like, why? How did I even get here? What am I doing here? What's happening? And it gets really hard, just because, like, like when you're in imposter syndrome, you feel like you're the only one there. Like, you obviously feel like the imposter. So therefore, sometimes you don't really want to talk about these things with other people, and it kind of like digs you into a deeper and deeper hole. So I think it's just like the feeling itself is pretty common, and it's like almost in all types of fields, but it also makes you feel like really alone and makes you want to be alone in a sense a little bit too.
Yeah, I think like we are all our own worst critic, I guess. So it's hard to kind of it's hard to not compare yourself to others. I think like you know, from an outside perspective, you know, you probably are doing really well for like where you are and stuff, and everybody else kind of sees that except you. So I think there is some kind of personal bias when you're looking at yourself and your own achievements and your own growth. And it's hard to kind of break out of that mindset where I just, you know, I'm not doing enough. Like it's hard to impress yourself and it's hard to feel proud of yourself because I'm not sure why, but it tends to be that way where it's a bit difficult to feel proud of your own achievements and feel proud of like what you've done so far and only kind of or have like kind of tunnel vision in a way where you only see you know what you're lacking, you only see what you haven't achieved, or you know you kind of focus on the rejections rather than you know what you have been able to kind of achieve so far. And I think that's pretty common for everyone. I feel like everybody has that sort of mindset. It's hard to kind of be completely unbiased and just you know look at yourself or kind of consider your you know your past achievements and be like, okay, I'm actually you know doing well, I'm actually you know on track as far as like you know where you are at right now, or you know in your career and in college and stuff. So yeah, I think it's just pretty common to kind of you know doubt yourself or critique yourself, but you know it's important to kind of break out of that.
Yeah, I would say personally, I think imposter syndrome, I think it mostly, I hear from it mostly from like people in tech or in kind of STEM. And I really think it has to do with the culture of those two areas. Both of those fields are very competitive and very like results based, I would say. Like it's all about kind of what kind of grades you're getting, where you're working, what like how good is the company you're working at, and things like that. So I think that definitely adds to imposter syndrome because we're always kind of looking at um, how good other people's achievements are instead of um, just looking personally and trying to improve yourself personally. So there's a lot of just comparing yourself to others within those industries and those areas. So I would say I think that's why we experience imposter syndrome, and like specifically women and people in tech, why we experience it more than others might.
I agree with Lauren on that, since like there's actually there's such a toxic culture in tech and everything. I don't know if like you guys have seen like those like company rankings, and they're like, oh, this is like tier one. If you work at like a FANG company, you're like top tier or something. And then but if you work at these companies, like, oh, like whatever. But like that's such like a toxic culture, and I think that contributes a lot to imposter syndrome because people are like, oh, if I don't get an internship at a FANG company, like I'm pretty much worthless. And that's not true at all. Like experience is experience. And I think that you gain like the same thing from working at like any company. Like you get to work like with coding and stuff. You get to work on like projects. You get to work on integration into like big project bases and things like that. So I think that also contributes to imposter syndrome. And another thing I believe contributes to it is that you see a lot of like people's best foot forward in a sense. Like a lot of people definitely like are not going to show you their flaws. Like they're going to put their best foot forward. They're going to come out as like the best person that they can be, and they try not to like be like, oh, I made this mistake. Like nobody tells someone like I made a mistake because they don't want people to like think of them like worse than your view of them. So a lot of people tend to like kind of, I guess, fake it till you make it. That's also like a thing where like you kind of just like act like you're an above person, and then people think you are. So then like they kind of get that mindset, and then somebody else sees this and they're like, oh, I'm not as good as them. But like really, I've heard a lot of things about how people are like, oh yeah, I actually don't know what I'm doing. And it's really funny because like a lot of people in tech companies are like, yeah, I'm kind of just like rolling with the punches kind of thing. Like I'm not really sure what I'm doing, but I'll make people make it seem like I actually know what I'm doing. So yeah, definitely that contributes to imposter syndrome because a lot of people are like, oh, like you ask a question and you think that everybody's like perfect, everybody's like knowing exactly what it's like going into their work and everything, but really it's not true. And for the last question, how can imposter syndrome be addressed and overcome?
I think at a personal level, I think just like going back to on a personal level, I think something that I've also learned that really helps is Like, one, don't compare yourself to other people, compare yourself to your past self. Two, if you wouldn't say it to a friend, um, don't say it to yourself. So, for example, like if your friend is working super hard on a project and they make one small mistake and like they were beating themselves up about it, you would obviously be like, stop, don't be dumb, you're doing a great job, it's okay, right? You got to apply the same aspect like to yourself. And I think it's hard because a lot of times we like say all this advice and give all this encouragement to our friends, but we don't do the same to ourselves. So I think being kind to yourself is a really great thing. And I think kind of going back to what Christina said about how imposter syndrome can be addressed and overcome on kind of like a more large scale matter. I think something that really helps is, yeah, definitely people don't like to show their flaws, and that's completely obvious. And I think one thing that I noticed that it shows a lot in is like in mentorship, especially when you have like a mentee or when you have a mentor, if you're in a mentee perspective, you kind of look up to the mentor because they seem to have everything in their life figured out. And I've noticed that in the same as in the mentor position as well. My mentee seemed to think that like I had everything figured out in life. I didn't really know what I wanted to do as a job until like this year, and I still feel like a little iffy on it sometimes. But I think learning that growth is not linear and growth is different for everybody, and just like kind of reaching out to other people and realizing and seeing that they have made plenty of mistakes, regardless of how like successful they may seem or how successful they are for that matter. And also just like showing that same kind of openness and vulnerability with like the people around you, because I I'm the type of person that believes like fake it till you make it is eventually just gonna like kind of wear you down and you're gonna get really tired. And I think it like kind of affects the other people around you too. But that's what my thoughts.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think transparency is really important whenever you are, when it comes to yourself and also when it comes to other people. So on a personal level, you should be transparent. It's totally okay to kind of admit like, I'm kind of lacking in this like area, or like, I don't know as much as like these people and stuff. And also like on a high level, as a whole, we should all be a little bit more transparent about, a bunch of different things, whether we got rejected or, it seems like everybody, always places the focus on like, oh, I got accepted to this internship, but they don't really like realize that people probably have a huge list of rejections that to go along with that acceptance. So I think transparency in that regard is pretty important. And also I think that, and this is something I struggle with too, is like I place a lot of like my self-worth based on like how well I'm doing in school, or, like how, many internships I've had or how many projects I've completed. But I think it's also really important to kind of compartmentalize like different parts of your life. So, and, have your self-worth not be based on, on, or not be based completely on like one area of your life. So I would say like, even though maybe I feel like I'm a little bit behind in this area, like I'm going to try and not have that kind of like devalue the way like I think about myself, even though maybe I failed a midterm or something, I'm not going to let that make me feel like a failure overall. That's just like a little bump in the road. And, my happiness is kind of derived from someplace else, not necessarily all from like, my academics or like, like my career and stuff. So, and it's really hard. It's difficult to kind of, especially when, we've been in school for the past, like, I don't know how many years, it's hard to kind of, kind of focus on other things because school is just, it takes up such a huge amount of space in our lives. And obviously, our career will as well once we graduate, but I think it's important to kind of do other things that make you happy, do kind of hobbies that make you happy, and just kind of place a little bit less of a focus or of a value on kind of like your career and academics. I feel like that's one of the ways that we feel imposter syndrome so strongly is because we kind of correlate how well we're doing in our career or in our academics with how much like, we value ourselves. Yeah.
I definitely agree with Ruth and Kayla with the whole transparency aspect of imposter syndrome. Just personally from experience, I've kind of gotten a little bit better with imposter syndrome just from talking to other people and being transparent with them. Every single person I've talked to about imposter syndrome has been like, yeah, I feel the same exact way, and like I'm going through the same exact thing. So I guess just having discussions with people kind of like this, and even like bigger discussions about imposter syndrome, makes it a lot easier to deal with, because you realize that if everyone else is dealing with it too, it's not really as big of an issue in my life, and it's easier to get over, in my opinion. So I would say just kind of opening up bigger discussions about it, and like building communities to kind of talk about it and kind of get over it together is really helpful.
I think another way that it can be addressed is that people need to realize that everybody sort of takes their own path in life. So like someone might like start their like career a little bit earlier, get a like internship in like high school or like freshman year of college, but it tends to not be like the majority of people who do that. It's like pretty rare. So I think everyone needs to realize that, oh, you can get like an internship your junior year and you're still doing like pretty well, and like even if you don't like get an internship in college, like you still graduated college, you're doing like pretty good. And then also another way is to realize like that your career and school aren't everything. I think it also like the rest of you guys, it took me a while to like realize that. I used to like associate a lot of my like self-worth with my grades and like my career. Like I remember like my freshman year, I was like one time I got like a C in a class, and I was like, oh, I was like so sad for like a week. I was like, oh my God, my GPA is gonna go down. But then I think my sophomore year, I got another C in a class, and I was like, okay, whatever. It's like it is what it is kind of thing. It's like you kind of roll with the punches. It's like I know I'm like doing well in my other classes. It's okay if I like may have not as done as well in like this class, and I didn't associate it as much with my like self-worth. I didn't attach myself to it. And I think like the same with like my career, like I've gotten a lot of rejections on top of like my, I guess like career successes, like in getting internships. I know a lot of people see like, oh, you got like great internships and things like that, but along like with those internships, I've gotten lots and lots of rejections, probably like 50 or so, just like a lot of rejections. um and yeah, just like don't attach your self-worth to like your career in school, because that can like be very detrimental. I know for me it was very detrimental to do that, because like every time I got a bad grade or rejection, I'd just be like sad and like, oh, like this is like I'm not doing well in life kind of thing. And yeah, so that is the end of the questions that I have. Does anyone have any other questions? Feel free to ask in the chat or mute your mic if you have any questions. Thank you, Harini. No questions? Okay. It looks like we have no questions. I'll just wait like a second in case somebody's like typing it out or something. Yeah, no problem. It's great sharing your experiences. And great like hearing from the rest of the panel. Okay. So no questions. I'm gonna leave everybody with a quote to end. Nobody's perfect. You live and you learn it, and if you mess it up sometimes, nobody's perfect. From Hannah Montana. Perfect quote. Sing along. Do you guys want me to sing it? All right. I'm gonna like embarrass myself. All right. Nobody's perfect. You live and you learn it, and if you mess it up sometimes, nobody's perfect. All right. Yeah, I live by those words. That's my like whenever like I experience imposter syndrome, I'm like, nobody's perfect. Perfect life quote. Right. So thank you guys for listening in. And yeah, thank you to the panel too. You guys had like great responses. And I actually like I learned a lot of stuff from what you guys said. And I'm like, yeah. Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for having us. This was an awesome panel.
Yeah, no problem.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.